My name's Anita Wills, and I am a writer, an author, activist, and I just want to comment on some of the disagreements that are going on social media about who can and cannot call themselves Native Americans. And what I want to say is that one of the things that I did when I first started researching and documenting my family history was to go and travel. At the time that I really started out, we were living in Oakland, and my mother was alive and she was there helping me with the children. I traveled a lot. I would go take the bus and go to Virginia on the bus. I mean, this is like 30, 35 years ago. And I would spend 3 or 4 days there. So it was a lot of moving around, going to archives. I went to the Mormon Temple in Oakland, did a lot of research there. What I was doing was documenting the history, the oral history that my mother gave me. She would tell, me that we had ancestors in the Civil War in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, but yet they weren't teaching us about any people of color or African Americans in the Civil War. And when she was telling me that, I was thinking, wow, they couldn't have been slaves because I knew that we were above the Mason-Dixon. You know, they talked about the Mason-Dixon line where there was slavery, and then right across the line, there was no slavery. So my ancestors were in Lancaster County and Chester County, Pennsylvania, serving in the Civil War. And I set out to get the documents showing that they were in the Civil War. And at the time, we didn't have Windows, we didn't have computers and laptops and stuff like that. Everything was done on typewriters. They had fancy word processors. I had one of them, which was, about the size of a laptop. And so that's what I was starting to write my books on the word processor that I was using. And the information that I was getting was coming from the archives, predominantly or primarily in Virginia. And everything was kept, the records were in the basement. So my cousin Perry and I would go in the basements, and he would take his camera and take pictures because he had done a lot of research on one side of our family, which was actually the Penn family that we came to find out was Native American, and they had a long history in Virginia long before the colonial people arrived. They were there in what is now Lancaster County, Virginia, and Northumberland County, Virginia, and they were the Wacomico, Wycomico, or Indians. They were a tribe there. And so we would go into the archives, and he lived in, at the time, he lived in Charles County, Maryland, him and his wife, and I would stay with them, often stay with them, or I would stay with some of the other people that I met, wonderful people that I met that were helping me and they were helping me like answering questions, and a lot of the librarians at Central Rappahannock Library were helpful to me because before I could travel or was traveling, I was writing letters to them and I was calling them. And then I would show up and meet them in person, and they always were helpful to me. And that's how I got a lot of the information I got and on those phone calls. So to say that, all natives were one phenotype or one race is disingenuous when you think about history, geography. Do you know that America is a continent all the way from Alaska, all the way through Canada, through the United States, South America, Mexico, South America, all the way down to Panama, all the way down to um, all the way down to Brazil and the Caribbeans. That's the Americas. Do you think everybody is going to look the same that came from there? I will give you a for instance. My maternal grandfather, my paternal grandfather was born in Orangeburg, South Carolina, dark-skinned man. But when my brother went and took his DNA, it came back that he was indigenous to Colombia, South America. His people were slaves in South Carolina, but he's native to the Americas. They're native to the Americas, and they're not light-skinned. They weren't mixed. And my grandmother was a Bonaparte. Her people came here after Napoleon was beat, during the Haitian Revolution. They were either came or were brought here from Haiti. They were slaves in South Carolina. And they were called colored. They weren't called African. They were called colored. In records that the Europeans left themselves. And my native ancestors in Virginia and Pennsylvania, they were redesignated, racially redesignated as mulatto, colored, Negro, or Black. That is what the colonizers did after they came here, killed and subjugated the natives they found, and also intermixed with them. That's why there's light-skinned ones. And then they redesignated them and said that they were mulatto or colored, Negro, Black. On my birth certificate, it says colored. That's what they said. They called my dad's people mulatto. They were born in South Carolina. Why didn't they call them Black or African? But they did later on. They were changing the census records. They had the power to do that. But I have the records where they were called mulatto. So I want to know these people who are upset because somebody is saying that Africans were here first. Africans were everywhere first. That's just a fact. Even Europeans admit that. Everything comes out. I mean, the educated Europeans. I'm not talking about, the ones with their own personal agenda. All humans came out of Africa. So if the Africans weren't the first one there, who were the first ones there? Because they only named 3 races: European, Asians, and Africans. So you have to come from one of those or a mixture of all of them. So it makes no sense, the argument that folks are putting up about a phenotype. What is the phenotype that came in over, or the race or the ethnic group that came in over the Iberian Peninsula? Who were they? Probably Asiatic, the Asians. You know, they weren't Europeans. And so when you look at the southern borders of the Americas, they were open. There wasn't nobody stopping anybody from coming. And the route that my ancestors took, or they're claiming that they took, not my ancestors, but the historians, would have been the same route that the Aborigines in Australia took. You know, the Aborigines are not light-skinned natives, right? They are native to Australia. They were the first people on Australia over 50,000 to 80,000 years ago. And I'm thinking that that's the route my ancestors took. They went through Melanesia, through Asia, you know, maybe even the Philippines. And then they came to the Americas. And yes, they were probably the first humans here. What does that mean? You know, they enslaved us all. They enslaved my native ancestors, stole their land, redesignated them racially. That's what you should be focusing on. Who caused all this confusion? Who's responsible for the lies that are being told? That's, my friends, is what you need to be talking about, and stop attacking each other. It's called divide and conquer. And only the most ignorant people continue to live by those rules. You all have a good day.